led to a period of political instability throughout Europe. Tribes of barbarian invaders swept across the provinces of Rome, looting and pillaging the land. St. Jerome laments this terrible time.
Savage tribes in countless numbers have overrun all parts, and those which the sword spares, famine ravages. I cannot speak without tears.
But what became of Britain on the outskirts of his crumbling empire? The trouble is, there is a gap in the historical record. At one end, we have 410, a date as indelible and emotive as 1066. 410 was the year that Rome told Britain, "Look to your own defences." At the other end, we have 597, the year in which Pope Gregory I of Rome converted the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. In between, there are only fragments and stories, a murky historical no-man's land. The perfect breeding ground for myths and legends. Emerging from the shadows of his period is the figure of King Arthur who, if he existed at all, rose to prominence in these troubled years. But here lies a crucial paradox. How can a period of Dark Age barbarism also have produced the greatest folk hero Britain has ever had? Was Arthur invented to make up for a lack of real history? Or is there some foundation to these peculiar myths? As a prehistorian, I'm used to dealing with long periods without any written records. But that doesn't mean that nothing happened. I'm going to find out what really did happen in this mysterious time. And I'm going to start in the place where the collapse of the Roman government must have been most keenly felt, the cities. The Romans built a network of civic centres across Britain. I went to York, one of the largest of these, to find out what happened after the legions left. Underneath the medieval city walls, it's possible to see the earliest layers of the city's rich history. Whilst the Roman and later Viking layers provide plenty of archaeological evidence, the elusive Dark Age layers contain few recognisable artefacts. It's almost as if the period is invisible to archaeologists. However, by the side of the Roman bridgehead in York, archaeologist Mark Wyman has made a breakthrough. By re-examining thousands of pieces of pottery thought to be part of the city's Roman history, he has begun to shed some light on the city's Dark Age past.
Okay, Francis, well, this is where we do the pottery. One thing that definitely does happen at the end of the 4th century in Britain is that coins disappeared. Coins are crucial to establish a chronology.
But with no coins available, Mark had to find a new way of interpreting the evidence.
We were looking for a type of pottery that might have continued in production beyond the end of Roman Britain.
The pottery Mark was looking at could not be matched to any traditional Roman products. Well, why do you believe this rather strange-looking stuff is 5th century?
Well, this is what's known as calcite gritted ware.
Yeah.
It's a late Roman coarse pottery type, manufactured in huge quantities in East Yorkshire. The material we're looking at here is actually from a site excavated by the site of the Roman bridgehead in York.
The layers that produced Mark's pottery had to be dated later than the Roman period. This suggests that pottery was being manufactured in York after the Romans left. This business of making pottery in the 5th century has put the cat among the pigeons. Why is that?
The received view of Roman Britain, one that's still quite widely held, I think, has been that Roman Britain's end is exceedingly sudden, and the archaeological material that we require to understand activity, to understand the past, just isn't being made. The reason I set out to do this research was to identify a type of artefact which we could say is manufactured in the 5th century, to argue against the idea of everything suddenly coming to a juddering halt.
Life in York did not come to a standstill in 410. Mark had found evidence for some kind of activity in the city after the Romans left. And he is not alone with these discoveries. All over the country, archaeologists are starting to piece together a picture of Dark Age Britain very different from the conventional story of collapse. It's time to start rewriting the history book. Archaeology, like all humanities, is a product of its time. And Victorian archaeologists were part of a British Empire which compared itself to Rome. So they had every reason to suggest that when great empires collapse, disaster and chaos follow. Amid the gentle hills of a Shropshire countryside lie the remains of the Roman town of Wroxeter. The romantic ruins fascinated early antiquarians, who saw it as an evocative reminder of a great civilization which had fallen into ruin. Wroxeter was first excavated in the 19th century. These Victorian archaeologists were so excited by the Roman remains here that they did not spot something that would completely rewrite the history of the town. It wasn't until the 1980s that archaeologists discovered the real story of Wroxeter.
As they wandered over the rubble, he found these two large round stones. The inspector said, well, perhaps these are the same. They noticed lines of packed rubble and plaster. And they suddenly realised they had this massive, great building. It was so big that it was a bit like trying to see an elephant standing a foot away. The north wall was taken down, dismantled, and the rubble was used to create a huge building platform. What they were doing was making a solid foundation onto which they could then build a timber frame structure. The dating was the major problem. The big building and all the other buildings around it had to fit in between about 520 and about 590, 600.
So, I mean, we're long, long after the official end of Roman Britain in 410, aren't we? And they're building huge buildings which are laying out in Roman measurements. I mean, they're thinking like Romans, aren't they?
They are Romans. This is our perception that we think of Romans as being foreigners who come over, occupy the country and then go away again. They weren't. The people in the country Romanised. They became Roman.
I mean, central control, central administration had sort of broken down. So, I mean, who was organising, and what was it, an Arthur-like character?
It's a very difficult question to answer because you had no evidence.
No.
But if you think about it, this is like trying to answer the question of who lives in Buckingham Palace purely from the foundations. What we can say, however, is that this person had power. So they are someone who's able to command authority. There is a structure to the society.
The discoveries at Wroxeter were a great advance in archaeology. They opened the way for archaeologists to re-examine other Roman sites in Britain to discover what happened during the so-called Dark Ages. Hadrian's Wall was one of the most important military sites in Roman Britain. Stretching from coast to coast, the wall includes a series of garrison forts. In its heyday, this was a bustling community of soldiers and their families defending the northern fringes of the empire. What happened after the Roman army pulled out has long been a mystery. It used to be believed that King Arthur fought his final battle of Camlan near this remote, windy spot on Hadrian's Wall. But recent work has shown that within the fort of Burd Oswald, there was an altogether more extraordinary archaeological story to tell. Bird Oswald is the most westerly of the series of forts which line the wall. Miriam Lincoln showed me round the remains of its military headquarters.
It's the main road through the fort, with buildings either side, huge drill hall, the granaries to the south here.
It was the granaries that archaeologist Tony Wilmot decided to examine when he began excavation here.
I just had a feeling from looking around the site that late Roman would survive quite well. And chap in one corner said, Tony, I think we've got a bit of a straight line here. And a chap in another corner said, it's a bit of a right angle. And I basically went to the top of the tower of the farmhouse, looked down, and there was just this great rectangle sitting there.
Above the stone foundations of the Roman granaries, Tony discovered the remains of a huge structure which was built long after the Roman troops withdrew. It was a unique archaeological discovery.
What was it like?
It's just jaw-dropped, you know. You're thinking, God, this is it, really. You know.
You've got this lovely, huge, open structure, thatched roof, and it would be the first thing you saw as you came through the gateway there.
I put one of my most experienced diggers just to give a very quick clean to this slight trench, and I didn't tell her what I was looking for. And I said, anything odd about this? And she said, there's these sort of hard, flat patches. Yeah. Oh, where are they? And she went, well, there's one here, and I pointed to that.
Yeah.
And there's one here, and I pointed to that. And sure enough, they paired up. It was completely objective because I hadn't told her what I was doing. That's how it became confirmed.
The strange markings that Tony found were the remains of 12 footings which formed the skeleton of an enormous wooden hall that had been built after the Roman troops departed.
So what kind of a group of men built a building like that? I mean, it's a socking great big thing.
I think the key is there's no break. The commander, perhaps even a hereditary commander by this point, would have become a central authority. And you can see that kind of gradually morphing into the idea of a petty king or a petty leader.
Are we talking about a sort of protection racket?
It's not hard to see them saying, well, OK, carry on paying your Roman taxes and we'll carry on seeing you all right. And from taxation to protection racket is perhaps not such a huge jump.
The history books tell us Roman soldiers pulled out, turned out the lights and darkness descended.
That's it, yeah. It wasn't happening here. These were native Britons. They had nowhere to go. This was home, yes. And so had to find a living somehow. Certainly there was no mass withdrawal from Bird Oswald.
Do you reckon there are more late forts along Hadrian's Wall?
I think there's certain to be. These communities didn't just disappear. If you're sitting pretty behind some high stone walls, you're not just going to disappear and start practicing subsistence farming. You're going to stay put. There's started to be evidence from a number of places now that this sort of thing took place. Perhaps Bird Oswald is just one of a network of fortified centres that are growing up. You could go down to the southwest, you've got hill forts being reoccupied. I think that we should see Bird Oswald as one of those, rather than being part of the Roman frontier system at that time. Everything's changed.
Yeah.